Today's lesson is on one-step inequalities. As usual, there is a video guide to go along with this lesson. So if you haven't already printed the video guide, go ahead and pause the video, print the guide, and then come back and do these problems with me. Now our last lesson was just on basic inequalities, so learning what inequalities are and then also graphing them on a number line. Today we're not going to graph them, but we are going to start solving inequalities. The nice thing about solving an inequality is that it's almost identical to solving an equation. There is one difference, and we will talk about that later in the lesson, but for the most part, solving an inequality is the same as solving an equation. So if you know how to solve an equation, you know almost everything you need to know about solving an inequality. So let's start with the basics. I always draw a line through my inequality sign. All right, that helps me split up the inequality, just like it helps split up an equation. All right, so I have the left side and the right side. Remember, just like for an equation, whatever you do to one side of the inequality, you must do to the other to keep it balanced, okay? So the whole idea in solving the inequality is to get the variable, the letter, by itself. I want to figure out what n is, or what the relationship of n is to a certain number. Because remember, inequalities is not about them being equal, it's about showing a relationship that's more than just equality, all right? So like greater than, less than, something like that. So n is not by itself, there is 18 with it. So to get rid of that 18, I need to do the opposite. Well, this is a plus 18, so the opposite operation would be to subtract 18 from both sides. Please make sure whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. That rule still applies. Now, 18 minus 18 is 0. So my 18s cancel out. They're gone, which is exactly what I wanted because I want n by itself. So I bring the n down. My inequality sign drops down. My less than sign comes down. All right, so don't accidentally bring down an equal sign. That's an inequality. We're solving inequalities today, so make sure you bring down that inequality sign. And then you do your subtraction. 19 minus 18 is 1. So the answer for this is that for this first inequality to be true, a number that I plug in for n must be smaller than 1. And I like to just check this through and kind of think about it. So that's what we're going to do. I need a number that's smaller than 1. Well, 0 is smaller than 1. So 0 should work if I plug it in for n. So let's try it. If I have 0 for n, 0 plus 18 is 18. I'll just write it off to the side. And then I have my less than symbol, and then 19. 18 is less than 19. That's true, so 0 works. My inequality was correct. The way that I solved it was correct. N is supposed to be less than 1. Anything less than 1 will work. 0 works, so any negative number will work as well. And that's what we do for solving an inequality. You can technically stop at this point, but I like to check and make sure that my sign is correct. So I'm going to be showing you how to check your answers today. Let's look at problem number 2. For problem number 2, our inequality is -4 is less than 7 plus n. So to solve this, I'm going to draw my line through the inequality sign. This time my letter is on the right-hand side. That's okay. We solve it just like we normally would. All right, the 7 is with the n, so I want to cancel that 7. That is a positive 7, so to cancel it, I will subtract 7. So I subtract 7 on each side. -4 and -7, the signs are the same, so I add those two amounts. 4 plus 7 is 11. Keep the sign of the bigger number, so it's -11. And then my inequality just comes down. 7 minus 7 is 0, so those cancel, and I bring down the n. Now, again, these are more confusing to me, so I like to switch them around. I like to have the letter on the left-hand side, which, if this is going to be a multiple choice problem on the test, they will put the letter on the left-hand side. So you really need to get used to having it on the left. Well, remember from our last lesson that if you move the letter over, you must change your inequality sign. See how it's eating the n here? The n is supposed to be the bigger side, the negative 11 is the smaller part. Make sure that it's still eating the n. The teeth are still going towards the n when you rewrite your inequality with the letter first, okay? So technically, my inequality is now n is bigger than negative 11, greater than negative 11. So let's just check a number. N is bigger than negative 11. 0 or 1 or 10, 0 is bigger than negative 11. I always like to use 0 because it's so easy to work with. So I'm going to put 0 in for n. See if my inequality is true. So the negative 4 will stay the same, is less than 7 plus 0 is 7. Well, negative 4 is definitely smaller than 7, so I did my solving correctly. I solved for n correctly, so n has to be bigger than negative 11 is the correct answer for number 2. For problem number 3, the inequality is negative 11 plus k is less than 1. So to solve this for k, we need to get rid of that negative 11. Well, the opposite of a negative 11 would be a positive 11 or plus 11. So I'm going to add 11 and make sure you add 11 on both sides of the inequality sign, right? Which is why I draw that line so I don't forget. I need one on each side. Negative 11, positive 11 cancel to be 0. The k comes down, inequality sign comes down. 1 plus 11 is 12. So my inequality is telling me that k must be less than 12. As long as k is less than 12, the inequality should be true. So I'm going to pick a number less than 12, and again, my favorite number, if it's possible, is 0. So I'm going to use 0 is less than 12. And I'm going to plug that into my original inequality. So negative 11 plus 0 is just negative 11, and my less than symbol, and 1. Negative 11 is less than 1. That is a true statement. So my inequality is correct. That is my answer. K is less than 12. Let's take a look at problem number 4. Problem number 4 is negative 12x is less than or equal to 12. And I want to solve my inequality. Now, the negative 12 and the x are right next to each other. Remember, that means multiplication. So I'm multiplying negative 12 times x. So the opposite of multiplying would be divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 12. So negative 12 and negative 12 cancel. I get x, my inequality sign, and 12 divided by negative 12 is negative 1. So now I want to check my answer, okay? X is supposed to be less than or equal to negative 1. Well, a number that's less than negative 1, okay, if I tried 0 this time, 0 is less than negative 1, that's not true, okay? 0 is bigger than negative 1. So I need to pick a number smaller than negative 1. I'm going to go with negative 2. Negative 2 is less than or equal to negative 1. Right, pick an easy number to work with. All right, so negative 2 is the one I'm going to plug in. I'm going to plug it in for x. So let's try it out. Negative 12 times negative 2 is positive 24. Remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I get positive 24. My sign is less than or equal to 12. So my inequality reads that 24 is less than or equal to 12. That is not a true statement. 24 is not smaller than 12. So what went wrong? All right, let's take a look at our inequality because it's not correct here. This is the one place where solving inequalities is different from solving equations. Remember I told you they're almost identical, there's just one small difference, and we were going to talk about it later. Well, we're talking about it now, okay? The difference is multiplying or dividing both sides by a negative flips the inequality sign, okay? So that's the one thing you're going to want to write down. Not maybe, you want to write this down so you don't forget, okay? Multiplying or dividing both sides of an inequality by a negative number flips the inequality sign. Multiplying or dividing both sides. It has to be on both sides. If both sides don't have that negative, you don't flip it, okay? But both sides of an inequality by a negative number, it flips the inequality sign. So that means instead of less than or equal to, I need to change my inequality to greater than or equal to. This is the only time you do that, is when you multiply or divide both sides by a negative. See how both of them had negative 12? This one had a positive 12 as well, but they both have the negative 12. As long as both of them have that negative 12 for multiplying or dividing, you flip the inequality sign. So it changes from a less than to a greater than. Let's see if that makes a difference, okay? X is now supposed to be greater than or equal to negative 1. Well, I can use 0 again. 0 is greater than or equal to negative 1. So let's try plugging in 0 here. Negative 12 times 0 is 0. Keep your inequality sign here, less than or equal to 12. 0 is less than or equal to 12. That's true, okay? So by flipping the inequality sign, I've now fixed the problem, okay? If you had left the inequality sign the way it was, it didn't work. But when you flip the inequality, when you divide or multiply by a negative, it fixes everything that went wrong. For problem number 5, our inequality is 16 is less than or equal to v over 10. I want to solve for v, so that means I need to cancel out that 10, okay? So to cancel the 10, I need to first identify what operation is it when it's a fraction. Remember from what we learned about equations, anytime they write a fraction in your equation or inequality, it means division. So the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So to cancel out this 10, this divide by 10, I need to multiply both sides by 10. So I'm going to multiply by 10 on the right side and on the left side. Okay? 10 times 16 is 160. Bring down my inequality sign, and 10s cancel out here, and we have v left over. Now, let's talk about why I didn't flip the inequality sign. I left it the same here. Remember, our rule was if you multiply or divide by a negative number, that's when you flip the inequality. Both sides, I have a positive 10 here, okay? Not negative. So I don't have to flip the inequality sign. Only flip the inequality sign when you're multiplying by a negative number, multiplying or dividing by a negative number, okay? So in this case, I don't have to flip it. Now, let's rewrite our inequality because we like to have the letter on the left-hand side. So v comes over to the left. I have my 160 on the right. My inequality sign, okay? It's eating the v, so I need it to eat the v here as well. So it's greater than or equal to 160. So I need to think of a number that's bigger than 160. Well, why not 170, right? 170 is bigger than or equal to 160. So let's try it out. 170, and I'm supposed to divide that by 10. So 16 stays the same, is less than or equal to 170 divided by 10 is 17. So 16 is less than or equal to 17. That's a true statement. So my inequality is correct. All right, problem number 6, we have for our inequality b plus 1 is greater than or equal to negative 11. I need to solve for b. So what's keeping b from being by itself? The 1. I need to cancel out that 1. So that's a plus 1. To cancel it, I would do the opposite. So I would subtract 1. So 1 minus 1 cancels. Here's my b. Now, to flip or not to flip? That's the question. I start having people have a hard time with these problems because they see the negatives and they want to flip it. But remember, it's only when you have multiplication or division that you flip the inequality when there's a negative. This isn't multiplying. This isn't dividing. This is subtraction, okay? So whenever you have subtraction, you never have to worry about flipping the inequality. You always keep it the same. If it's subtraction, just keep it the same. So make sure you realize what you're doing in the problem. If you're adding, subtracting, never change the inequality. If it's multiplying or dividing, then you have to pay attention to if it's positive or negative. If it's positive, keep it the same. If it's negative, flip it. Only for multiplication and division. So, negative 11, negative 1, I'm going to add those together because the signs are the same. I get 12, and it will be a negative 12 because you keep the sign of the bigger number. So now, my inequality is telling me that b is supposed to be greater than or equal to negative 12. So a number that's bigger than negative 12 would be 0. I like to use 0. So 0 is bigger than or equal to negative 12. Let's try plugging in 0 here. 0 plus 1 is 1, is greater than or equal to negative 11. Well, 1 is bigger than negative 11. That is a true statement. So my inequality is correct. b is greater than or equal to negative 12 should be your solution for number 6. At this time, go ahead and pause the video. Try problem number 7 and 8. Work those ones out on your own and then come back and check your work with mine. For problem number 7, the inequality is 66 is greater than negative 6n. So what I did was divide both sides by negative 6. 66 divided by negative 6 is negative 11. And then I flipped the inequality sign because both sides had a negative on it. All right, they were both being divided by negative 6, so you must flip that inequality sign. So it became less than n. Now remember, you want the letter first, okay? So my letter is first, and then my negative 11. And then from there, it's eating the n, so I wanted to make sure it was still eating the n down here. So it turned out to be that n is bigger than negative 11. So if I were you, I would have chosen 0 to check it if you wanted to check your answer. If I plug in 0 for n, my 66 stays the same, is bigger than, my inequality sign greater than. Negative 6 times 0 is 0. Again, this is why I choose 0 all the time because it's easiest to work with. 66 is bigger than 0 is true, so my inequality is correct. All right, and then our last problem, problem number 8. I solved it by adding 16 to both sides. I kept my inequality the same because I didn't multiply or divide by a negative. And then negative 18 plus 16 is negative 2. So k is supposed to be greater than or equal to negative 2, which means I can use 0 to check my answer. 0 is greater than or equal to negative 2, so put in 0 for k. 0 minus 16 is negative 16. Is greater than or equal to negative 18. Well, negative 16 is bigger than negative 18, so my inequality is correct. And that's the end of our lesson on solving one-step inequalities.